When we interviewed Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the build-up to the G20 summit, he said he hoped that the Indian G20 would be the catalyst of a new global world order. The guest who's joining me at this moment is very special in the current context because he's been an ace diplomat. He's also a top minister in the Narendra Modi government, and his responses will be at the intersection of diplomacy and politics. Minister Hardeep Puri, Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, Petroleum and Natural Gas, for joining us on India Today. Thank you very much. Let me start by the vision that the Prime Minister had outlined in that interview he did with us, catalyst for a new global order. Do you think in the Delhi declaration that's come out, Minister Hardeep Puri, that objective has been achieved? This declaration signaling India's coming of age in the global arena?
Rahul, thank you very much. Before I respond directly to your question, I think my friend Vivek Karju, you were very unfair on him. He's a friend of 40 years standing, so to interrupt his learned discourse on climate change, I seek his indulgence in saying I'm not responsible for what you did. But let me come to your question and how I plan to answer it. It's not just a question of what the Prime Minister, I think the Prime Minister was being modest when he said that. What the Prime Minister has succeeded in achieving, or rather the G20 Indian presidency has achieved, it has achieved a document called the New Delhi Declaration through a human-centric approach to development post-COVID and the initiation or the start of a new world order, with a new India being at the center of that. So I endorse what was the content of your question, what the Honourable Prime Minister said, but I think when the Prime Minister spoke to you then, it was still work in progress. Today, you see evidence of that in the New Delhi Declaration.
Can you explain to everyone watching how this corridor between India, the Mideast and Europe will actually work in the real sense? It's a fantastic idea to be able to bring these countries on board as a huge achievement, but how will it operationalize? What will it really mean on the ground?
I am probably the wrong person, and I want to be uncharacteristically modest. This is a question which should be addressed to those of my colleagues who will be dealing with the issue. I can tell you that infrastructural cooperation is one thing, and I think the countries of the Middle East, the two countries that you have in mind, the United States, India, they will be able to achieve that. But I want to draw your attention, if you permit, to the Global Biofuels Alliance. I think that is another very major takeaway that you're going to get from this G20. Why? Because biofuels in the years to come will acquire an increasing importance, not only because of the value of global biofuels in the global economy. The IEA says it's worth about $92 billion today. It's going in the direction of $192 billion by the time the 2030 agenda comes. All this will be possible only because for the first time in the history of the biofuels, you have an international arrangement which brings together consumers, producers, other stakeholders, those who do research on it. I mean, you take all the other takeaways from that, plus your corridor, which is going to go through that. I don't want to comment whether that corridor is an answer to some other, some initiative by some others. But, the G20 and the people who are talking about these corridors are anchoring them in realistic, doable, small parts. And that is what it is about. But as I said, I'm probably the wrong minister to be having this conversation with.
Okay, explain how the Global Biofuels Alliance, in your view, speeds up the adoption of biofuels as a fuel and the ecosystem of technology around it from where we've reached. How do you think this will take things to the next gear, Minister?
No, I'll tell you, this is probably you've gone to the very essence or the heart of the matter. Biofuels usage is already a fact of life in many countries. I've had the privilege of serving in Brazil. I've had the privilege of serving in the United States, where biofuels are big play for a variety of reasons. In Brazil, you can go to a petrol pump on any given day and decide depending on the price of petrol or ethanol that day, whether you want more of one or more of the other in a flexi-fuel engine. In the United States, it's essentially from maize. In India, we've diversified. We have increasing use of maize, which we lately has risen, sugarcane. We are also making biofuels in 5 plants from agricultural waste, second generation plants. We are going to be having third generation plants. As the idea of biofuels gets together, first of all, what is a biofuel? You will need some international discussion. The whole arrangement will be virtually hosted, and a lot of the stakeholders like Unica, which is a cooperative in Brazil, will happily contribute to, it's yearning to make a contribution. The Grain Council in the United States, my colleague, the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, when she came here and we were tying up the loose ends of this, I mean, I saw a palpable excitement about the fact that we will be able to do the journey to green transitioning through biofuels as a very major element. And I think till green hydrogen arrives on the scene, which is a few years down the head, biofuels will be a very important transitioning fuel. And I think that $192 billion target by 2030 is modest. It will be even higher because you are able to make biofuels from relatively simple plant and machinery. And all our plant and machinery for biofuel production in India is locally manufactured.
You know, in the journey of the G20, and I'm hoping you will put on your diplomatic pagri just for a moment, Minister, there were concerns if there is no joint declaration, then questions would be asked about the future of the G20 itself. Now that there is this Delhi declaration, do you think India has redeemed not just its presidency, but also shown that the G20 remains the most potent multilateral forum at the international stage for economic cooperation with some elements of geopolitics thrown in?
Rahul, remind me to thank you separately in a different way for asking this question. You know, as a student of history, I've been taught the first question you ask when you read a book is, who is the author? What is the author's background? What is the author's motivation? You know, when the G20 was born, I was reminding some close collaborators of mine, there were people in the international system who turned around and said, no, G20 is a violation, it's an abrogation, it's a departure from the MFN principle. You know, the world has to be anchored in multilateralism, in universality, one country, one vote. What will a few countries get together and, produce a select club or an elite club? To which my answer was, that if the multilateral system anchored in the United Nations, which is based on the principle of universality, is doing so well, you would not need something like a G20. The G20 was born in a moment of crisis when the world food and financial and economic crisis took place in 2008, and the existing institutions, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, did not have an answer to how to respond. So the leaders of the world took a decision to elevate a group which was headed by finance ministers into a heads of state and government level group. So what happened? G20 was formed. The London summit in 2010 helped apply some balm and bring some semblance. And after the time, G20 was born in a crisis. The next crisis is now multiple crises. And the Indian presidency has not only navigated through that, but I want to repeat, the Prime Minister's approach for a human-centric development post-COVID for the establishment of a new international order with a new India at the center. This is not only, and I repeat, Rahul, this is not only an Indian moment, it's something for the globe. Look, I've been a professional diplomat. I never doubted the capacity of the team under the Prime Minister to get a unanimous declaration. So I'm always asking the question, where was the naysaying coming from? The same guys who will look for some opportunity. You know, the lion on top of the Parliament building, his mouth is a little more open, the roar is a little distinct. I mean, I asked them, was the lion a domesticated pet that you kept? I mean, what is going on? Now, no, everything is perfect, but you know, G20, you will not get a declaration. Who said you will not get a declaration? I am very clear that leave it to those who have the professional responsibility and who have been given that responsibility to discharge it. And I want to say through your show, they have acquitted themselves with aplomb. And my congratulations, the entire team working under the Honorable Prime Minister, and it's his hands-on, handling of each issue. And so it's not only just a spectacular cultural extravaganza, meetings in 60 cities, 220 meetings in 60 cities, but look at the content of the New Delhi Declaration. Rahul, I believe You and I will have enough opportunity in the coming days to analyze that thing in terms of how it produces incremental movement forward. And India, I think India has been, thanks to the 9 years of decisive leadership, India has been there. It's been on the moon, by the way. And now we are all over the moon. So I'm very clear, that, you know, all Indians would rejoice, except for a few friends of yours and mine who shall remain nameless this evening.
I remember interviewing you when you were India's permanent representative in the United Nations in New York, and at that time you were pushing very hard for the United Nations Security Council to be expanded. That ultimately never happened, but India during its G20 presidency has been able to ensure that African Union gets a seat on the high table. China has been pushing through debt and through infrastructure projects to build deep linkages with African countries. India using its soft power, trying to be the spokesperson, the voice of the global south, now getting Africa on the high table. To what extent do you think this will deepen India's linkages with the African continent, Minister?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy that the African Union's getting its legitimate representation on the table of the G20 has happened under India's presidency. I'm very clear on that, and I think the Indian effort right through, and I saw the body language when the Prime Minister was receiving the AU President. I mean, that spoke volumes. As you say, one picture is worth 1,000 words. This one was worth more. Number one. Number two, we are talking about the Security Council. Rahul, the Security Council, which is a designated agency to determine whether there are threats to international peace and security, and then to authorize countermeasures. That's a Security Council. Security Council has been paralyzed. If two permanent members of the Security Council are disagreeing on something, Security Council is non-functional. So there are two aspects. What has the G20 done? I think the G20 India presidency has shown that you can make a global contribution even when multilateral institutions, including the designated ones, are paralyzed. Number two, does this increase the case for India's Security Council membership? Listen, I don't have a role to advise the government, but I think the Security Council needs India. When it comes to a natural disaster or a calamity somewhere, it's Indian heavy lifting for disaster relief which works. When it comes to, say, an earthquake in Turkey, Prime Minister sitting in Bangalore and the Prime Minister makes a phone call, Indian relief reaches there. When it comes to something else, so India is doing all that a permanent member of the Security Council is expected to do and more. So I think my answer to that question is yes, the African Union joining the G20 will give it more economic heft. It will also increase the salience. And I think the countries, and I'm a great admirer of Brazil, as you know, and Brazil has the presidency, this momentum will have to be maintained and this momentum will have to be raised. And I think India has delivered, and the G20 also will gain its strength from this. Thank you very much, Rahul.
One or two more questions. Since you've been ambassador to Brazil, do you think they'll have a tough time competing with is there an element of competition given the spread of India's G20? How do you see that dynamic playing out? There's a lot of pressure on them now as hosts.
No. Every country has its own genius. Every country has its own way of celebrating the hosting of such plurilateral events. I don't see any competition.
Okay, one last question before I know you have to go to the Rashtrapati dinner, but there's a heavy weather made of Xi Jinping not coming to Delhi. India and Delhi don't seem to have missed Xi much. We got our job done. Xi wasn't there. He can do what he wants, but India went out and did what needed to be done.
I will not comment on who came, who didn't come entirely. But look at the turnout here. I mean, yes, there were one or two exceptions, but look at the turnout. I mean, you know, it's heartwarming. Even in the Global Biofuels Alliance, I was so thrilled to see the presidents of Brazil, of the United States, representative, the Prime Minister of Singapore and others, consuming countries, producing countries, everybody there. That's the spirit. I mean, and I don't know where you are just now, but you should come down here and see the electricity here in all these events. So I think that's what we are. That's a moment for not only quiet reflection, but also with due humility, celebration.
As a skilled diplomat, you've said what you could. You've ducked and weaved around what you couldn't, but we'll talk about that at length later. Thank you very much. Let me not hold you from all the millets that wait for you at the Rashtrapati dinner this evening. Enjoy yourself, Minister Puri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.